Hello everyone and welcome back to Backlog Banter. Today we are going to be talking about Princess Peach Showtime, the premier new Nintendo title on Switch for the year of our Lord 2024.
No, we're not doing the Endless Ocean Luminous review today.
Oh, my bad. No, my bad. But we've played Peach and we're here to talk about it not only in the context of this year, what it means for Nintendo, what it means for the Mario series, but also what it means for the developer of that game, which I can't really hold all these games.
But see, what if I took a couple because
how about that?
Could hold
Whoa,
them
look
up
at all
and
these games.
they
Yeah.
look nice.
This is Goodfeel, and Goodfeel has been
Goodfeel.
making games with Nintendo for almost 20 years at this point. They've been making them since the Wii, and we're here to talk about Goodfeel and Princess Peach Showtime, and also primarily our thoughts on the game, and for Abram, why it's a little bit of disappointment.
I don't think it's a little disappointment. I think it's a bad game.
Bad disappointment.
But I just want to note before we really get into this, unfortunately, we don't have a DSi here with Luxu's lineup installed.
No Luxu's lineup.
So we can't hold up a prop for Luxu's lineup, but we do the best that we can. I didn't really like Princess Peach Showtime.
Yes.
What did you think of Princess Peach Showtime just off the top?
I think I've been wrestling with my thoughts on this game since I finished it. When I come off the game, the last few levels I think are pretty solid. I think there's a fun final boss fight, a lot of more interesting stuff unlocks as you beat the game. I came off it higher than I think I am now.
Sure.
I think that, again, I think it ends strong, and I think that my opinions are buoyed by the fact that this is different. It is new. It is different for Goodfeel, as we're going to talk about. Yeah. It is different for Nintendo and for the Mario series, starting essentially what could be a new sub-series like Captain Toad Treasure Tracker or Luigi's Mansion were for those other characters.
Yeah.
And that really intrigues me. And so I find this a very intriguing and potentially exciting game, but really only on the conceptual level. Right. And so now that I've had a couple of days, almost a week to think about the game since I finished it, I don't think it is very good. I think that I want to be sweet to it because it's a kid's game, but I think the reality is many games, almost every game that Nintendo makes is for all ages, but I have found them to be more than this game. There's a lot more going on, a lot more to dig into on a mechanical level. And so this game feels very, very different. But and I would say I like that conceptually, but I think in reality it's different in a bad way.
Yeah, I mean, well, you said something interesting there for once as you were talking.
Legendary moment, everyone. Glad you could be here.
You said, this is the next Luigi's Mansion or Captain Toad. And what's interesting there, of course, is that one of those is a series and one isn't.
Yes, that's a good point.
And I don't know. I tend to feel like Princess Peach Showtime would probably swing in the opposite direction towards the Toad direction. Obviously, we don't know how this game is selling. We know that it didn't launch well in the UK, but we're talking strictly about the physical game sales in the UK. And that's a big market for Nintendo, but that's not nearly enough information.
And we'll find out its launch window sales in May when the next financial report is, and that'll be the first month or so of that game's sales. But I do think that it won't be until, I would say, after this upcoming holiday season that we really get an understanding of what this game's trajectory is going to be like.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I want to... I think the first thing I want to say about the game itself is I kind of want to hone on this idea you had of it being a kid's game. And this, to me, is just not like a line of thinking that I feel is necessarily true to how Nintendo designs games.
Sure, I would agree with that.
And it's something that I think has become kind of a shield against criticism for a title like Princess Peach, which I think is just simply not true. Yeah. Because in my opinion...
Or not fair.
Yeah. That's a better way to put it. Because in my opinion, I don't really think that there are games for kids or games for adults.
Yeah. I mean, hey... Paw Patrol and Bluey. I mean, those are ubiquitous.
Well, that's a good point. There are no doubt a section of games made solely for kids. Yeah. But there's a reason why I'll say games of some kind of artistic significance aren't split between kids and adults.
Sure.
Because when you're making a game for kids, you're targeting a lowest common denominator and designing a game in a way that is not going to be approachable for anybody beyond a very particular age demographic. Sure. And that's fine if that's your intent, but I think what's exciting about Nintendo always is that their games have always been accessible to everybody.
Yeah, there are very few Nintendo games that I feel quote unquote stoop to this game's level in terms of this does feel a little bit closer to something like the Bluey game that is just about being in a space and enjoying flashy colors and fun music and funny transformations and a couple little silly guys, and it's about that experience and being in a digital space rather than anything particularly mechanically engaging, which is where Nintendo's games usually end up being able to transcend age groups and age demographics. Is there's usually depth to the mechanics, to the platforming, to the skill level that you can find digging into even some of the simpler Nintendo games, or in the case of Goodfield's other games, a much better sense of exploration and puzzle solving and secrets that I think on the mechanical level and on the puzzle level, this game lacks in both areas.
Yeah, I mean, I want to specifically talk about Kirby's Epic Yarn.
Oh, that's actually one of the probably the most kiddie games Nintendo's ever published.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about this game is that this was really of the era when Nintendo was adding a lot of accessibility options into the games. And sorry, I mean accessibility in sort of like a skill level sense, opposed to a disability sense, which Nintendo's still behind at. Yes. But in Epic Yarn, you actually can't lose. Yeah. The game is very lax. But the difference is, and why this to me is an all ages game that's great for kids but exciting for everybody, is because it really asks you to be an active participant in the gameplay experience. Sure. And it asks you to really look around your environment and not only explore but also experiment. And I mean experiment in a basic sense, but in an important sense of, okay, if I mean,
that's what puberty's all about. Experimenting.
Sure. When you use your little Star Whip in Epic Yarn to pull like a zipper or like a bead string or pick up an enemy, there's an experimental element there of, okay, well, now what do I do with this enemy? What happens when I pull this away? What can I find? How can I really pay close attention to my environment, progress at my own pace, and find something compelling? Because then if you're a young kid, if it's one of the first games you've ever played, you can just enjoy trying to get to the end of the level. Yeah. And there's nothing really making that a frustrating experience. Even the Yoshi games, I think, are a little bit tougher than this is. Yeah, definitely. But I'm talking by scales, of course. But if you're a more experienced player, there's a lot to love about Epic Yarn as you dive into the explorative element of the game.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of secrets. You upgrade your hub area. You're building out all these things in the mini games and in the overworld and stuff. Yeah, I think that's why. Specifically these two games, these are by far my favorite games that Goodfield has ever made, because they have, even with very simple gameplay in terms of there's not a lot of challenge, the challenge comes from I want to see everything, because there's a lot of interesting little nooks and crannies, and the world design is so intricate and complex that I feel like it's worth exploring and finding what else is hidden around every corner, especially in Crafted World.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a really important point, because again, I just feel like challenge is not the right descriptor for a game like this. It's about engagement. And as you're explaining, I think Crafted World is a great example. I know that people give Crafted World shit for the 100% journey, but I've never gone on it. I've just enjoyed the game in a more casual way than that. But it's very engaging, the way you can throw eggs into the background, the way it complicates the Yoshi formula, all of the new level ideas and new gimmicks, to little flourishes, to little secrets to find. What surprised me most about Peach Showtime is that there's really none of that spirit.
And I think it's all there in very surface level ways. Is when you look at this game, its concept and its overall structure, I think you can feel a similar energy to what came from Crafted World, of that variety of different level idea. Every level's going to have a slightly different concept to it. Peach is transforming, like basically all the characters in these games. There's transformation sections, and there's little sections where you're on rails, you're riding on top of something. That happens in Showtime, it happens in Epic Yarn, it happens in the Yoshi games, but I think it is only there at surface level. There's I think like 6 to 10 little green star guys to collect in these levels, but they are nowhere near as hidden as the collectibles in these other games. The rewards for collecting, especially against Epic Yarn, where there's all the little hub area you can upgrade, or in Crafted World where you have the little slot machine where you can get a bunch of different costumes. The rewards aren't as interesting in this game, so it incentivizes me less to do it. And the level design is, again, I think on a surface level, complex, and there's these little areas, and sometimes you can like stand on a spot and find a little secret area, but it's a scale thing of it's there, and it like to check that box, but it doesn't check that box fully in terms of an experience of actually going through these things.
Well, I just don't think that there's literally enough space in Princess Peach Showtime to facilitate what you're talking about. Because you're talking about the collectibles being on a surface level, the sense of exploration being on a surface level. I think it's literally because Peach takes up so much of the screen's real estate, and you're often walking around these very narrow locations. Yes. Either you're in complete 2D and the 2D spaces don't have much complexity to them. The camera's way closer than it is in any of the other games. Yeah. But in the 3D spaces, you don't really have any room to maneuver. Yeah. You're ostensibly on a 2.5D plane.
Yeah. Well, you're ostensibly on a 2D plane.
Yeah, and I think that is what flattens any ability, in my opinion, to have the level of hidden depth that these other Good Feel games have. Yeah. But I think the other thing that's really odd to me about Peach Showtime is that I don't think that Mameda no Bakaru, which is Good Feel's other 3D game that released exclusively in Japan.
Last year, by the way.
Last year. I don't think it has the same problems Peach Showtime does. I think it has its own problems for sure. Mm-hmm. That game is in its own right technically flawed in some ways, and I think the combat is kind of weird. Yeah. But when you think about translating Good Feel's DNA into 3D, when you're in the levels of Mameda no Bakaru, they're quite sprawling. Mm-hmm. They're still obviously linear, but there's a lot of secrets tucked away. Sure. And a lot of little guys to find. Yeah. And I didn't really know what they did because I can't read the Japanese. Yes. But there is a lot to find. There's a much greater spirit of exploration there. Mm-hmm. And it really does make me wonder what went wrong or what factors contributed to Showtime being this way.
What did they change?
Well, one thing we know they changed for sure is the director. The director of this game hasn't directed a game since the N64 Goemon game. I don't know how many Goemon games there were, but N64 era is the last time he directed a game. Yeah. But I don't necessarily know if that's enough. Mm-hmm. I part of me wonders if this game has been in development for longer, so none of the learnings that the other team could have gotten from Mameda no Bakaru could have come into Princess Peach Showtime. Mm-hmm. It's not the engine. Good Feel has actually worked in Unreal Engine, which is what Peach Showtime runs in. They worked in Unreal for Yoshi's Crafted World.
Which I believe was the first Nintendo published game to be developed in that, and we've since seen that one more time with
Pikmin 4 is the other example. So I think ultimately...
Imagine I'm holding up Pikmin 4 for a little pop comedy. It's back there, but I don't want to do the little thing where my butt goes up in the air and I have to reach back.
It's not worth it. I think that it's ultimately hard for me to pinpoint what happened. Yeah. It ultimately might be as simple as a new framework. They don't really know how to explore it. They're not confident with this formula they've come up with. So what we have here is a almost like launch window feeling approximation of what could be something bigger and better.
And I would agree with that, and I think that is maybe why I think that there's the potential for this to become a sub-series. I think that the track record of those European physical sales aren't great, but I think the idea of making Peach a more foregrounded character that they're going to be including alongside other characters in a more prominent way, giving her own cast of characters, which is this game does, and I want to talk about in terms of new original characters to bounce off of, and this feeling like something that is a good framework. This is a good starting place. It is not. It is not. I think the fully fleshed out version of this that I would want, where the levels are radically different. Because I want to get into the sort of the surface level variety, where the collectibles are a little more engaging, where the combat is a little more thought out. These are things that I think can be done. Yeah. And I think a Princess Peach Showtime 2 or a Princess Peach whatever that is in this 3D 2D plane that has some other continuing the characters forward, whatever. And it has that focus on variety, that could be a really interesting game. But again, I think this just does feel like a tech demo, like the starting place. Yeah. And when you were talking about Mameda no Bakaru and the secrets hidden in some of these other games, I'm trying to pinpoint why I think this game's collectibles, because that's, I think, really where I feel it strays most differently from the success of Crafted World and Epic Yarn, which I love both for their collectibles, and what I've played of Blue World, is I can't really think of many games that are 3D in this way. This almost feels like let me finish my clause. 3D in this way that succeed with having interesting environment design, engaging collectibles, hidden areas. Because the games that I can compare this to are games like Streets of Rage and Battletoads that are in a 3D space where you can go backwards and forwards into the screen, but it's just linear. And this is that exact same thing. There is no take a secondary path or even branch the path up or down, make that choice. That isn't really how this game's design work, because it is basically a 2D game. The 3D plane is really only there for show, which I think is a little bit underwhelming.
I mean, I think that this speaks to another just massive underlying issue I think this game has, which is it's not built on anything.
Yeah.
If you think about Odyssey, for example, Super Mario Odyssey is built on the foundation of just a really, really mechanically exquisite platformer.
Sure.
And then there's a lot of variety in the game
Yeah.
because of the different gameplay opportunities afforded to you by the captures. But all of the captures are built on top of a really, really phenomenal foundation.
Yeah.
To me, that's the best way to innovate and to make your game have variety but still have a strong core.
Yeah.
Mario is Mario, and then the captures are a layer on top of the Mario experience, which makes it feel fresh and different. But there's a like an ideological design intent under there.
Sure.
Peach doesn't really have that.
No, I don't think it does.
Because you spend minutes of your time with the game in like a regular Peach form.
Yeah.
At the beginning of each of the first save each transformation, and then in the hub. But the hub has no
combat. It has nothing. Basically.
It has not. Yeah, it's not even about combat. I mean, like if you think about Delfino Plaza, there's not really platforming challenges in Mario Sunshine's hub, but there's still stuff to do. There's nothing to do in the hub.
Yeah.
So most of the time, you really are just in these transformations, which are some variety of either a weird, very, very, very simple character action game, or a bunch of different ideas that I think basically never work.
Yeah. Yeah, and so let's talk about the variety, because that is the point of Princess Peach Showtime.
Yeah.
The back of the box has got her in all these costumes. The entire point of the marketing of this game is Peach has a ton of variety. She's in these plays. Each of these the levels are going to play differently. And one of the things that I expressed to you as I finished the game, I went upstairs and I sort of started telling you my thoughts on the game, is that I think that the variety is very surface level as well.
Yeah.
I was mentioning that for the level design and for the collectibles, but I think that the variety is a veneer at a certain point, because outside of a few key examples, which are hit or miss, but I like the ones that are more different, which I want to talk about those in a little bit. Most of the levels are just brawler. It's just like a little kind of wacky Streets of Rage, beat up enemies, but it's one hit to beat the enemy, or jump and then press A to beat the enemy. It really is. Yeah. So many of the levels end up being just some kind of melee combat. And I think that is really what flattens this game for me, is that when I'm playing Kung Fu Peach or Sword Fighter Peach or Ninja Peach, these aren't, or Mighty Peach, these aren't materially impacting the actual gameplay. It's the same enemies across the whole game, and I'm pressing the one action button to do one attack and beat the enemies in one hit across, I think, 6 or 7 out of the 10 transformations.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I feel like in some ways a more apt comparison than Streets of Rage is like a game like Bayonetta.
Okay.
Which is weird, but that's part of, I think, the weirdness intrinsic to this game. Because this is ostensibly, like I said, a one-button character action game.
Yeah.
Because the game presents itself...
Bayonetta uses more than one.
Well, the point is, I think that this game operates with this really unearned sense of spectacle that a game like Bayonetta earns through much more engaging mechanics in much more obviously high-stakes scenarios.
Yeah.
But when you're playing Peach, the same tenets are there. You are parrying or dodging. The camera is often doing these weird sweeping like cinematic moments as you defeat an enemy. Peach does like these flourishes with her sword that take away control for a moment. It's a lot of flashiness for not only no depth but no real engagement. There's really there's no timing to the parry window. There's no anything. Yeah. And now, again, this might come back to the idea that some in the audience might have, that we're asking for this game to be way more complex than it should be. My response to that would be ultimately that maybe you shouldn't frame so much of the combat in this way. Yeah. Maybe pick something simpler. I mean, you can have simple combat in games. Yes. And you don't have to present it in this odd way. It reminds me a little bit of Lego Star Wars, The Skywalker Saga, which has ostensibly like DMC level depth to the combat for no real purpose. Yeah. So change that depth for a sense of spectacle in Peach Showtime and things like the Mighty Peach stages, the Sword Fighter stages. I think you have a good comparison of a game that feels in some ways to me very over-designed.
Sure.
I think Peach Showtime has been very heavily over-designed.
Okay, well, let's nail in on this, because I think that you and I have been having this conversation about where the game strays from its focus, I guess. And you find that it's mostly in when the game takes away control from you, in having these things that stop you from continuing gameplay forward. When you finish a battle, she does a flourish. When she is talking to someone or she's thinking about something or whatever, the game stops. And talk to me about how you feel that takes away from the focus of this game.
Well, I just don't think the game has any focus.
Sure.
I think we're getting to that in part, but I think the more important thing for me is I think the game has no flow. Mm-hmm. When you're playing a game like Kirby's Epic Yarn or Woolly World, well, any of these games actually, you do encounter transformations. You do encounter things that radically change the mode of the gameplay. And Good Feel is pretty good about making those feel like fun spectacle moments.
Oh, absolutely.
But
I remember specifically the Kirby's Epic Yarn
the big tank.
The big tank when you're shooting the thing out of the mouth, and I love that level.
But the thing about it is that those moments are not the baseline for the game.
Yeah.
The baseline of the game is a well-cultivated and gradually progressing platformer. Mm-hmm. And then you have these moments that change the tempo entirely. But Peach's tempo is like you're going to all the different like gear shifts on a car, one after another as you're trying to move forwards. Mm-hmm. The game is intentionally designed in this like cyclical way where you wind through all the different powers. Yeah. And all of the powers have, I think, their own sets of weird roadblocks when it comes to feeling any kind of flow.
Sure.
When you are the Detective Peach, which I think is by far the worst part of the game.
Yeah, I don't like those levels either.
You're constantly having to stop and finesse Peach's movement to try to align with a clue and hold down the button to pop up a canned animation.
Hold on the button for a way longer than it feels like it should be.
I think that breaks flow.
Yeah.
I think that when you are constantly auto-dodging and doing these fancy animations in like Mighty Peach or sword fighting, you're losing your flow. Mm-hmm. You can't really get in any flow state between powers because a lot of them are different. Mm-hmm. So I just don't feel like the game doesn't build on anything.
Well, I think that also is in just the straight up combat.
Yeah.
There is never the time to build flow because every enemy is defeated in one hit unless it's a specific set piece battle. There's some kung fu battles. There's like there's actually only like one or two in-level boss battles. Yeah. Like the first sword fighter level has you fighting against this big plant, which isn't amazing, but it's a lot more engaging. Right. It's a lot more engaging than almost all the other fights in the game, except for the actual boss fights, which I think are pretty good.
Yeah.
The majority of the combat in this game is you touch an enemy and they are done. They walk away. They don't die. They just sort of like dissipate or they walk off screen. And so there's never the time to build a combo, to string between enemies. The combat, which is a big focus of most of the levels of this game, is just you press the button and you're basically done.
This is actually a really good point, and it's something that I thought of because my friend Cody was writing in a Handle History about Kirby's Dream Land, which is a very, very simple game.
Sure. Also a bad game.
The combat in Kirby's Dream Land has a second layer of depth to it, as does the combat in the Yoshi and Kirby games, wherein when you swallow, it's actually the same principle. When you swallow an enemy, you then have to choose what to do with them. Are you going to spit them back out? In the case of Yoshi, you're going to turn them into an egg. When are you going to use that egg? Suddenly the enemy becomes a resource. In Kirby, it's the same way. It's about how do you use that resource. In a game like Bayonetta, you kill the enemy and that's done, but that's because there was a level of tension between you and the enemy before they died.
Absolutely.
In Kirby and Yoshi, the tension is actually after you've killed the enemy. Sure. It's how you're going to use them. Prince Peach Showtime has neither.
Yeah, well, also, and I think another great point in favor of Kirby and Yoshi above Peach is that combat reward of sucking in an enemy or turning them into an egg and having that be a resource is intricately connected to the puzzle solving of those games and the exploration and the fact that you are hitting things in the foreground with Yoshi, or you're spitting out in Epic Yarn as opposed to other Kirby games, but Kirby games in general, using the copy abilities or spitting out to destroy a block. Enemies are a resource for exploration and puzzle solving in a way that enemies are never interacting at all with the puzzle solving. The closest would be that if you want a green star gem thing, which is the main collectibles in Showtime, you have to beat some enemies. And that's the puzzle. But the puzzle is just combat. at that point. And I think that the fact that the puzzles that exist, I don't think almost any of them are particularly good, but the puzzles that exist are not connected in almost any way with the combat. The closest thing that is connected to the combat is that you get coins, and you can spend them to get different clothes, which is an aesthetic thing, and I don't necessarily have a problem with that. I think it's one of the better elements of this game to be able to customize your peach, and that's kind of cute. Though, also, you don't spend almost any time in normal Peach form, so the fact that you're customizing it is a little bit disconnected from the majority of the gameplay of this game. But you connect. The only thing you meaningfully connect with the combat is a weak customization, not the puzzle solving, not the exploration, which I think is what so many of Nintendo's best games do, is intricately connect each of the elements of their game's design, which I think this game just feels very disparate in that way.
That's one of the biggest reasons to me why I feel like the game, in a lot of ways, just feels like it lacks also a lot of the touchstones of how Nintendo designs games as a whole. And sort of some of the unifying principles that kind of are part of the reason why everybody thinks that any game published by Nintendo is made by Nintendo. Because as we were sort of mentioning before we started recording, there's a good argument to be made for the fact that Kirby's Epic Yarn or the Yoshi games really aren't that much different than what Nintendo makes otherwise.
Correct. Yes. Or have other teams do for them in the similar vein.
Right. Yeah. And I'm like, you know, when their first major game with Nintendo, Wario Land Shake It, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about later, obviously they're picking up the Wario Land series from another team and taking a lot of the same ideas. It's that has always been Goodfield's MO. And it kind of makes me wonder if they end up in a position where they are so unmoored from a framework, like Prince of Peach Showtime, if they actually just don't necessarily have the creative vision to execute to the same level of Nintendo's other games, which is, I don't mean that to sound like as much of a criticism as it might sound. I think that some teams are just really, really good at executing a vision. And I just, but not concepting the vision. Because I just find it hard to really... I find it hard to have a thesis statement about what Prince of Peach is trying to accomplish. And I was talking with Phil in the Discord about this. I think it's also part of the reason why the marketing for this game is so bad.
Absolutely.
Because I think this game is inscrutable. I think it's so hard to describe what it actually is.
Well, yes, and that is both this game's biggest strength and biggest weakness for me. I think in the weakness is what we've been talking about today. It's not like these other games, and because of that, it doesn't have years of lineage and the knowledge that we bring to it to know that this is where these ideas come from, and that means that it's a little bit weak in that regard. It doesn't feel like it's fulfilling anything or continuing anything forward necessarily, but it also is something very new for Nintendo. This is, in my mind, the way that I view it is like a 2D brawler. It is like you're just in this light 2D space and you're jumping around, you're doing little puzzles, but it's mostly just some light combat in a 3D space with heavy air quotes, and there's not really other Nintendo's games
like Wario World.
That game actually is platforming though, which is this game doesn't, and also that game has like combat where you have to hit the enemies more than once, which this game doesn't really have. But that's why I think I was so excited for it. Is because I'm like, that is very different. This isn't a 2D platformer, which would be easy to do and easy to imagine, and it isn't a 3D platformer, which would be easy to do and easy to imagine. It's a light action game, light character action game, light brawler game, whatever words you want to describe it. And it kind of feels like a meshing of these ideas, but without the history or groundwork that comes from Nintendo having tried this kind of thing a bunch of times. It feels to me kind of like the first Kirby games, where the idea is there, but especially in those earliest ones, you don't have copy abilities. You don't have the same kind of hidden collectibles that make some of the later Kirby games more engaging. It is the base idea that is interesting on face value. But on a mechanical level, because this is so different, it makes it doesn't feel like it's fulfilling anything.
I think it's hard for me because I feel like it's different like by comparison, but it's not different by its own right. I mean, I think about, because if let's play with your idea of it being like Nintendo's step into a new genre. Let's then take a look at something like Pikmin 1. Pikmin 1 is an RTS game in the very loosest sense of the term. And there's so much charm there, and there's so many new ideas, and there's such a clear vision for how that game operates. think of a more recent example, Splatoon. Splatoon is a much closer approximation of a typical online multiplayer shooter than Pikmin was of
RTS games,
RTS. But when you look at Splatoon plays nothing like any other online shooter you want to mention. It's not a compromised version of them. It's a new Nintendo take on it, which really centralizes this idea again of exploration and curiosity, which I think is at the core of basically everything Nintendo does. The ink mechanic has so many possibilities for you as a player to explore. The same way that controlling your Pikmin has so many possibilities for you to explore. The same way that Yoshi's Woolly World is full of secrets for you to explore. Nintendo's games are built on exploration and curiosity. No matter how linear they are. I think that's the principle that unites all of them. But I think Peach just simply doesn't have that. It has a watered-down version of what you can find elsewhere.
Well, I wanted to return to the idea of surface level. I think Peach has that at surface level. The idea that across the course of this game, you're going to turn into a bunch of different costumes. And she's going to visit all these different lands that are going to have slightly different they're gonna have very different aesthetics, and there's gonna be different enemies. When you're looking at this game and you see that there's going to be this variety in terms of the levels are intended to be different, that's pretty exciting. Like, oh, I wonder what it's going to be like to turn into Detective Peach. Oh, I wonder what... I'm interested to see what the Mermaid Peach level is like. And I think that I want to get to a couple of the specific level types that I think do different enough stuff to warrant their inclusion. But I think the reality is that is, again, surface level, and it returns to my idea of so many of the levels ideas being similar. You visit the level, you turn into Ninja Peach, you're like, that's pretty cool. She's a ninja now. The costume looks really good. The music is fun. The level design is nice with the sort of cardboard and like papercraft aesthetic. And there is that like base level curiosity of, oh, it's going to be cool to try something different. And to see that. But the reality then becomes, once you've played through half of one of those levels and you realize the combat is basically the same as the other ones, it loses that spark of exploration and discovery. And it actually kind of like sours it of like, oh, I discovered something. I discovered that this wasn't different.
Let's talk about some of them specifically, but I want to raise one other generalized complaint I have that my friend Giovanni pointed out that I then couldn't really get out of my head.
Hey, what up, Gio? We go way back.
I don't know
who this is.
I don't think that the aesthetic of Princess Peach Showtime is that interesting. I don't think that the theater gimmick actually works. I think it's a major regression from Crafted World, wherein Crafted World took their aesthetic to the absolute maximum. You see the backsides of objects. You really get a sense that every possible element of the world is crafted. It's the same with Epic Yarn. I think that the aesthetic for me of Showtime is a lot closer to Woolly World. And my unpopular opinion about Woolly World is that the aesthetic here isn't that interesting. It's just taking Yoshi's Island and covering everything in wool.
It doesn't play almost any different because of the yarn aesthetic, and I think that is I think you're right about that. I think that I don't come down on it as harsh as you do, because I think that in a way I see the idea of the aesthetic is entwined with the variety of, they want this to be something that has a cohesive vision of all of these are built with little guys in papercraft hats because they're on a play stage, and the idea of her doing this transformation because she's an actor. All of this, I think, conceptually mixes with the idea of this game very well. Of her being an actor, of this being a play. But I agree that I don't think it commits to that vision in terms of exploring that from all sides, because in the way you would see the backsides of objects and be able to interact with them in a meaningfully different way because they were papercraft and paper mache and all this stuff. You never go off the stage in Showtime. You never see the behind the scenes of the lighting and the rigging and these things that would make that meaningful to the stage's design. What it ultimately ends up becoming is a way to make Peach going on all these adventures and being all these things cohesive within one idea. But I also think in a certain way, and I think we kind of talked about this a couple days ago, it takes away from the idea that Peach is doing these things. She's doing a play version of these things, and it's kind of the complaint that people love against the "it was all a dream" ending that some movies or stories will have. It's like, oh well, then that didn't really matter too much because it wasn't reality.
I mean, I've just never really subscribed to that complaint. Like, I don't think Link's Awakening is any less meaningful because he wakes up at the end. But I think for me the problem also, Sorry. I almost said sorry if I spoiled Link's Awakening. Link's Awakening has been out longer than both of us have been alive, so I'm actually not sorry. Princess Peach Showtime.
Also, if you're watching a backlog banter video, you know what Link's Awakening is.
There's a lot of examples for me. It's not only just about the fact that you don't see behind the curtain, literally. It's about how you enter secret areas by posing on a particular spot on the ground, and a random platform comes up out of the ground, and you literally just clip through the ground into the area below you. Or in the case of the detective levels, actually do something really interesting, where the stage flips.
I like those moments.
And I think that's really cool because...
Again, reminds me of Yoshi's Crafted World. Can't praise it enough in this video.
but it is also, and this is another thought I've seen in the discourse soup in my mind of Princess Peach Showtime, so I apologize, I can't exactly credit who it was, but they were saying it's a clever idea because it shows... It's a stage transition. It's the idea of you being on a two-sided stage to show different things. That's the sort of thing that goes the distance to make it believable that you're in this framework. It's not believable when I'm going through the ground. It's also not believable because there's no real anchor point.
No.
Thousand Year Door actually has a much better anchor point than this does. Because the battles literally take place on a stage and you've got Toads in the foreground.
Yeah, good point.
You know, celebrating. And then there becomes an interesting gameplay dimension to that. Mm-hmm. There would have been opportunities, I think, for there to be interesting gameplay dimensions to playing with the notion of the stage versus off the stage, or at least better selling the notion of a stage in Peach Showtime. But instead, the game just wants to do the craft aesthetic again, which I think is a mistake. Because I do think that Goodfield is a very artistically talented studio that doesn't have to rely on this aesthetic. Wario Land Shake, it's a great example. It's one of the best looking games on Wii, I feel, and it's hand drawn and it's aesthetic. Or even Momeda no Bakaru, I think that has a very nice aesthetic. They know how to do more stuff than this, so it feels a little bit odd that they sort of half-heartedly went after a visual identity that I think they already perfected right here.
I mean, I come down again a little less harsh than you because it does feel distinct. The idea of putting these on the stages and seeing how they make little buildings in the background and the guys come out of the doors and stuff like that. I think that it is unique, and I think that is where I feel this game carries forward the lineage best of Epic Yarn, Crafted World, Bully World. Of these games have very unique aesthetics that no one else is doing. No one else has ever made a stage game like this that does the full stage game aesthetic. There are elements of it in other games, but they commit to a unique conceptual aesthetic that I do think they nail in on, because I do think this is a very good looking game. I think the textures look great. I think that the lighting looks good. I think that the animations are great, especially on Peach when she's transforming into the different things, and Stella's coming up and like cheering her on, and she's putting on a face because she's getting to the mode of this different costume she's put on. This has the animation quality and believability of things that we praise from developers like Next Level Games that makes Luigi's Mansion 3 that has this really believable world, and Luigi has so much personality. I think my biggest praise of this game is that Peach has a lot of personality in this game. I love when she transforms into these things. I love when she's emoting. I love when she's posing and making a face. It makes her feel like a more varied character than most, especially in Universe Mario characters, are given the space to work with. She feels very heroic in this game. She's trying out all these different things. It gives her a lot of space to work with, and I really think that this game does excel in that area specifically.
I think that the characterization of Peach is definitely the strongest part of it. I think that it's really, really, really good, and I like how Nintendo is reframing Peach as a character on the whole. Reframing her in Odyssey, reframing her in the movie, reframing her here. There's even fun little details like the new Princess Peach clothing. The little tag has 8-bit Mario encountering 8-bit Toad, and it says something like, sorry Mario, but our princess is on another adventure instead of in another castle. I think
that's good.
This sort of large rejection of the damsel trope, again, also not even having her be the kidnapped one in Wonders, even a further step beyond how she's characterized in Odyssey, even though I think Odyssey also, especially in the post-game, does a great job with her going around in different outfits and being a sightseer and having
kind of in some way a progenitor of this game. I love post-game of Odyssey walking up to the next world and seeing what kind of little costume she's got on. She's got Tiara with her, who's also got a little different hat on. It's fun.
So I think this is a good continuation of what Nintendo's already been doing with the character, and I think that is really nice. I don't really think much of the conceptualization of Peach's world beyond that, though, is really that interesting at all. I feel like Theats have immediately fallen into the Toad issue.
Sure.
There's no real iconic Theats.
Of course.
And the only like you meet some named Theats, like you meet the detective, Junior Detective, but his name is Junior Detective. Yes. It's similar to the Bobby in Paper Mario Origami King thing. Where
that's a name though.
That's a name, but it's the general idea of like it's just a character, and you've given them some basic sense of personality, but nothing else. I feel like the Theats are unremarkable. I think a lot of the enemy design is unremarkable as well.
Absolutely, and I think that the game swings between two extremes in some way. I think that I actually really like the Theats on a design level, in the same way that I like Toad. Yeah. It's a funny little guy. There's a bunch of them. You can put different kinds of hats on them. I especially like, and I think the best design element of them is the fact that their nose can flash and light up different colors that shows their emotions.
Yeah.
When they're scared, it's red and it's flashing. When they're sad, it's like blinking slowly and it's like a deep blue. That is a really cool, very Nintendo design decision to show a funny little guy with a bunch of different emotional range, because they're running around, they're panicking, they're sad, they're confident, they're running away. You give them confidence when you like hit them with your fucking sparkle whip, and they're like, "All right, I can do this," and their nose flashes yellow and they charge forward. I like the Theats. I don't like that there isn't a Theat that has a personality, that is the leader of these things, and I think it's especially because, again, with the stage thing, these are just like actors. They're just kind of players. Like when the character is Kung Fu Master or Mayor or whatever, it's just a Theat in that costume. It's not like, I would really like if there was a specific Theat that was the owner or the manager of this fucking not hotel, theater. Yeah, that's the word. Theat and theater. It took me a while to put that together, but that's why. That's like the manager of the theater that's going into each of these with you. That is the one that's kidnapped or something, or is taken over, and so you have like a little bit more stakes of I am friends with this character, and I want to help this character in specific, rather than one of the reasons why I think the Toads and Theats are similar is like, they're kind of just all fucking Toads. They're all just Theats. It's whatever. But I do think that the other extreme is the enemy design, especially the basic enemy design. There's like these little fucking grape guys that have these little masks on, they're purple.
It reminds me a little bit of the problem with like the ghost design in Luigi's Mansion 2 and the basic ghosts of Luigi's Mansion 3. Mm-hmm. There's really no iconic element to them. And this is where I do feel, and I know that it might be a regressive complaint, but I do feel like the presence of more regular Mario enemies would have been a smart decision here. Because I think that...
I don't think that's necessarily regressive, by the way.
Well, I just think, there's a lot of people who are like, it's great that there's brand new Mario enemies and everything. But I think if you look at a game like Mario Wonder, I think part of the... Not only are all of the new enemies in Mario Wonder designed to a much higher degree of quality.
I would agree.
It's also EPD-10s. There's a reason for that. But I think interspersing them within Koopas and within Goombas and Boos and everything sort of grounds them in a way and doesn't make them feel so weird. Yeah. When you think about Luigi's Mansion 1, you're fighting regular Boos and you're fighting bizarre portrait ghosts. Yeah. The portrait ghosts are also much better designed, again, than any of the enemies in this game. Yeah. But I think that mix would also be good on a narrative level. Because the narrative in this game is just dumb. Yeah. And I don't mean dumb in the way that like Mario games often have of overly basic narrative. I think this is just like, I don't care. It's kind of weird. What I kind of wish is that I wish that Bowser came to this theater and he took over the theater and he filled the stages with his minions, and then you have to help the Theats who are in peril take back their kingdom. You have a big antagonist, and then you could also have the opportunity for Peach to lead the Toads around. Sure. Because I think that one element of her character that has never really been well explored in games is that she is the ruler of the Mushroom Kingdom. Yeah. How cool would it have been if you could have had some kind of relationship with the Toads? Maybe they're your helpers. You send them off to do things.
I mean, in some way, I see it as an easy parallel to something like a Kirby in the Forgotten Land, where you have that Waddle Dee town, and Waddle Dees have always kind of just been the Toads of Kirby. But the idea of Waddle Dee town in Forgotten Land, of returning back to it and building it up and asking them things and like going around and talking to them and doing mini games with them, it gives them a sense of place and a relationship to Kirby that I think could have been done in Showtime, and I think that would also solve the problem of a really, really boring hub area. Yeah. The hub area in this is just 5 circular areas. Right. It's the basement and it's 4 floors, or I guess 6 areas, there's 5 floors. And for areas on either side. The basement's a little bit different, but not by much.
Yeah.
There's not anything to find. There's not any hallways to go down that would make this, frankly, feel like more of a theater. I think that actually the layout of this doesn't make it feel like a theater at all.
That's a great point.
Because where's the I mean, I guess you have the wraparound staircases that kind of have a theater feel, but they don't lead anywhere. They lead to the next floor, and then you walk into a door, and then you're in the level. There's not a sense of place in this place, and it's just not very interesting to be in. It isn't until after you beat the game that you unlock something to do with your goddamn coins, which is spruce up the place a little bit. Add some balloons, put some ribbons around the thing, and it's not great, but it's something to do that makes the place feel a little bit more alive. I think this is just a very poor hub area because it's not particularly visually interesting. It doesn't make sense contextually, and it's not interesting to be in mechanically. There's not even the base level of like 3D World, which I don't think has a very good hub area, but where you can walk behind the thing, bounce up, and you find a 1-up mushroom or a coin or whatever. There's no secrets here. There's nothing to find. There's nowhere to go. They all look the same, but a slightly different color, which is just really, really lazy in my mind.
I mean, another parallel is potentially the Comet Observatory from Galaxy, which is widely criticized. But at least in the Comet Observatory, there's like a contextual place you have to go to enter the levels. Yeah. And there's at least some sort of platforming engagement, some sort of sense of place when you go into
also some progression, like you're bringing it back to life, and it doesn't really feel that way here. I mean, you're like, and this doesn't even really make too much narrative sense of like you're like severing these threads when you beat the level, and then a door like etherealizes in the middle, and then that's how you face the boss. I don't understand where any of these ideas meet theater as the identity of this game. I wish that the first floor was that lobby area. Okay, that's fine. Yeah. 4 doors here, introduce you to a couple ideas. You go up the staircase, big ballroom or something like that, or a movie theater aesthetic, and
you would want a ballroom.
Ding. Or a movie theater thing where there's like a coliseum of seating or a big screen on one side that maybe you could do some sort of Mario 64-esque things where you're changing the projector or changing the lighting to unlock the level. Like, there's also no variety in how you unlock levels or how you approach them or how you enter them, which is something that many other games have, and I feel like this game could have excelled with, but it just never decided to touch.
What are some of the positive transformations you want to point out? I know you have a couple.
I have 2.
Okay.
I like Patisserie Peach. Bakery Peach.
Interesting.
I like Bakery Peach, and I like Mermaid Peach. I think
I agree on one of those.
The reason I like the Baker Peach,
yes,
I don't even know how you fucking say the actual name of the
patisserie
chicken.
A patisserie. It doesn't matter.
No, the Bakery Peach. The Bakery Peach I like because it's mechanically different. You're completing these little puzzles. You're doing these little mashing the button challenges. They are over very quickly, but I like the aesthetic a lot. I think it's one of the best aesthetics in the game. But it also is not combat focused. It's about these little puzzles. It's about completing these little challenges against rival bakers or getting the cookies and then running it over and putting on the thing. It feels like the best not the best. It feels like the good mini games that I like out of other games that spruce up that gameplay. Sometimes you'll be doing that in a Kirby game, or you do that in a Mario game where it's a one-off little area where you're completing this little timing challenge to keep the toads happy or whatever it is. I think that it breaks up the combat-focused gameplay that almost all the other levels have.
Yeah, I really don't like this one.
Sure.
I hear what you're saying 100%, and I agree with you on the aesthetic point for sure. I just think that it's just like lame QTEs. Mm-hmm. That's ultimately the problem with it. Not that it. I think you're right that there would, in concept, that the variety is cool, and I think you could have had more engaging actual mechanics with the cookies, for instance. Why am I? Because you mash B until in a bowl until the dough gets
muffin turns green or whatever.
Until it turns green and it gets chocolate chips on it, then it turns into sack of cookies.
Yeah,
and you literally walk like for 2 seconds to where you need to deliver the cookies. Why am I not making the cookies and having to navigate some kind of little obstacle course to bring the cookies?
I totally agree with that. Yeah,
that's kind of my problem. And this is why I also just don't think that the structure of the game works that well. Because in between the first and the second patisserie stages, nothing really changes. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, you got to do the challenges faster under more pressure, but they don't really get more complicated. The mechanics don't get any more interesting.
And
the scenario
that's true about all of them.
Yeah.
I mean, each of these sets of stages continue forward a very, very basic narrative.
Yeah.
spikes are on the castle, or the guy got kidnapped, or figure out the mystery, and you're never going to see these characters again. They're not particularly interesting, and there's not a lot of mechanical progression. And the only thing that really ends up changing between the areas is most of them have a set piece at the end of the game, which is like, I think some of the better ones are like the cowboy segments where you're on the horse and you're whipping, you're taking the boxes off the back of the other horses. That's a little bit more mechanically engaged, and there's nothing else really like it in the game. There's one where you're like on a big thing and you like jump in, you're like collecting coins. But
I should note, by the way, I don't think I said it. I didn't finish the game.
No, you didn't mention that yet.
Yeah, I got to the 4th floor before I was like, I've seen it soon enough.
Yes.
So I didn't get to that one.
And I will say, one element of the game that you did miss out on, where I do think that the concepts, the combat, and the design gets a little bit better, is in the levels where you have to rescue the sparklers, which are in the basement.
Yeah, I only did one of those.
It's the 3rd level of each of the 10 transformations, and they're way better than the other ones.
Yeah, I just did the sword fighter
they introduced a new mechanic. They have a little bit of a different aesthetic, because it's like, who the fuck knows? The reality's crumbling. It's like things are falling apart. I think those are some of the best levels in the game. But I do agree that the progression of these things, these levels, even to that 3rd level, which I am saying is they are better than the previous ones.
Yeah,
it's not by much, and that's what I think makes the on the smaller structure of this game a little bit disappointing, and that's within a larger structure of the game that just is more disappointing.
Yeah. The mermaid one, I just want to talk about quickly.
Sure.
I agree with you. I think that one's one of the best. I really do like the idea of controlling Peach and then controlling the fish.
Yeah.
It's simple, but I think it's more satisfying.
Absolutely.
And it keeps you more literally engaged, because you have to control both elements. It's not an automation in any way. I think that's really good. I also really like the ice skating one. Sure. I think the ice skating one does a great job of actually keeping you, again, in a flow of the gameplay. And I think, again, it's very, very simple. Press A in the yellow snowflake, press B in the green one, but there's a nice tempo to that. I thought that was really good. I do want to make one other comment about the general gameplay, though. Sure. Another thing I really like about, because you're talking about Princess Peach's personality.
The PvP
before. I really like watching Peach slip and slide around on the ice before she gets her power, which I know is a little bit silly, but what I'm trying to illustrate is that, to me, it's those sections where the animation is actually the best. Sure. As Peach is picking up her dress to run around, and she's using the sparkle wand, and it's just regular Peach there. Mm-hmm. I think that those parts are really great, and again, it goes back to my disappointment that you don't spend more time in a regular state. Yeah. Because I think you're totally right that they go to great lengths to animate Peach so well, but you just don't get to spend enough time with her, and those sections are so fucking boring.
Yeah. Oh no, absolutely.
That it's like, what's even the point?
Yeah. I also think that this game's length and variety fail in one other way. I think I mentioned the simplicity, or the sameness of many of these, but I also think that it ultimately, while the aesthetics are different, they all end up feeling kind of interchangeable, because they're based so strongly on archetypes, which makes sense. But I think that there are just other more interesting archetypes that they could have gone with, or they could have mixed archetypes where things are crossing over a little bit, and you're a ninja in a cowboy world or something like that. And I was just sitting here and you were talking about this, and frankly my mind was somewhere else, because I'm thinking, why didn't they do a Mushroom Kingdom themed set of plays? Why aren't the Thief dressed up as Toads, and then there's a big papercraft Bowser at the end, and Peach has her own version of a like overall outfit where it's more platforming based, and then that would be a more platforming thing, and it would play into this a little bit more, and that would be a lot more distinct combination of these aesthetics. I think there's just things that they could have gone with that would have felt a lot more different, and I think that if it had been more balanced between combat levels and platforming levels, or combat levels, platforming levels, puzzle levels, like I think I just think there's a lot of ideas they could have gone with. Why isn't there a space level where there's low gravity and it's platforming and you have to deal with low gravity or something like that, and she's got an astronaut outfit on. These are very, very basic, and so many of them are based around combat that it makes me just think of the possibility of her dressing up in crazy outfits and doing crazy things. Like, again, the mermaid one is underwater. It controls differently. The mechanics are different. It feels different. The bakery one is mechanically different from the other ones, and mermaid and bakery are two of the weirdest ideas that this game has. Yeah. Her dressing up as a ninja, or as a sword fighter, or as Sherlock Holmes, these are kind of the most archetypical, basic concepts you could have in terms of transformations.
Yeah, a lot of them circle the same drain.
Yeah.
And there's two other things I really want to raise. One is that I think that this game feels low budget.
Okay.
There's one example in particular. I'm like, what the fuck are we even doing?
Okay.
and it was in this stage that made me decide that I just simply don't want to play the game anymore. Which is the second Detective Peach stage.
Yeah.
First of all, I love how fucking insane the premise of this one is. There's a bomb. There's a terrorist threat that Peach has to thwart.
That's pretty crazy.
And it's not even like...
Maybe conceptually one of the highest stakes levels.
Yeah, it's not even an illusion. They're like, this guy's a fucking terrorist. He's taking hostages, and there's a bomb. So I was like, oh, this is gonna be cute. Well, not cute. It's gonna be weird. It's like when you see like fucking, you know, like Mario with a chainsaw cutting a guy in half. You're like, that's funny.
Yeah, something I do quite frequently.
You get the bomb. It's at the clock tower.
Yeah.
And then the game goes through about 5 still images to convey what happens next. There's no cutscene.
Sure. Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
They pick up the bomb, they move, the camera freezes, they move again, they throw the bomb, the camera freezes, the bomb blows up, they fall back, the camera freezes.
Yeah.
This is a technique, one of many techniques done to create cinematics in a game without the budget for them.
Yeah, yeah.
And this, to me, is Nintendo's fault, not Goodfield's fault. Because I imagine that Nintendo is the one bankrolling a project like this. So it feels like, and this ties into my second point, I think that this game does Peach a massive disservice in a very similar way to the way that Super Princess Peach did.
Okay.
The game is not distinct or good enough for this character.
Oh, sure, yeah.
What do you think about that idea?
No, I agree. Yeah. I think that, well, I don't know. I agree and I disagree. I agree in the quality area. Yeah. I will not be putting this game amongst my favorite Switch games. Right. I will not be bringing it up when people talk about the variety that is on Switch, the variety of quality games, new series, new inventions of a series. I think that if it was a great game in the style of Luigi's Mansion or Captain Toad series that people bring up that are distinctly...
Hey, Captain Toad has 3 games.
What?
Captain Toad Wii U, Captain Toad 3DS, Captain Toad Switch.
If you want to count the DLC as a separate game, hey, there we go. But in the way that those games are mechanically distinct, aesthetically distinct, and are just quality games, Luigi's Mansion 3 and Captain Toad Treasure Tracker are some of the best games of Nintendo's recent output and are solely focused on those characters and feel very distinct from what is otherwise. The quality does not match those other ones. And I absolutely wish it did, because then I would be like, oh, look, every main Mario character has a great series to call their own. But I do think that in terms of distinctness, I disagree. Because I do think the theater aesthetic, the variety, the transformations, the feats, the Madame Grape and her Sour Bunch as enemies, there was a real effort to make this a Peach thing, as opposed to Super Princess Peach, which was a 2D platformer in an area with tons of 2D platformers, with Mario enemies, which I like the spins on Mario enemies, but with Mario enemies and with like Bowser as a boss, not much of that game felt like giving Peach her own identity. But I do think that introducing feats and having the transformations and having it be in a gameplay style that Mario games have not done, a light character action mini 3D area game. That's a new kind of game.
Yeah.
So I think there was an attempt, but I think the execution does not meet the attempt where it would be another Luigi's Mansion or another Captain Toad.
Yeah, I think... Can I change what I said entirely?
Sure.
I think the game is too distinct.
Sure. Oh, well, all right.
Because you did a great job of refuting why it is distinct. Which made me realize, actually, my problem's the inverse.
Fair enough.
Let me put it to you this way. Part of the issue with Super Princess Peach is that the game is quite regressive. It is about women. God, women sure are hormonal, right, guys? And that's the premise of a lot of the gameplay. Yeah. Now, I don't think I think that is an uncharitable reading that has cropped up in hindsight.
Yes, I would agree.
But I don't think there's any doubt that if you have a degree of I'm not saying an academic degree, but a degree in your mind of media literacy, it's not a very empowering concept for Peach in that game. But at least she was in the Mushroom Kingdom, or actually, I don't know if that game takes place in the Mushroom Kingdom.
They're always making new fucking kingdoms in these games. I don't know where this one takes place. The fucking theater kingdom. Who knows?
It's at least in a realm that is, and in the gameplay style, in an aesthetic and everything's commensurate enough to show that Princess Peach has a strong place in the Mario universe, in the Mushroom Kingdom. Princess Peach Showtime completely takes Peach out of everything that she is supposed to have some sort of claim to.
Yeah, the only Mario aesthetic things are the occasional Toad that are around the hub area.
Yeah, and I think that on one hand, if we're talking from the perspective you're talking about the intrinsic excitement of brand new art direction, I think that is great. But I also think there's something to be said for the fact that Peach is not allowed to have a starring role in a big, great game in her own universe.
Sure.
She is still the side character in her own universe. And I just think it would have been really nice if this had been a high quality game made by a core Nintendo team who could really sit with the character, sit with their new direction for her, and put together a game of some level of meaningful quality that would assert her as part of this series better. Captain Toad has a stronger game in the Mushroom Kingdom than Princess Peach does.
True. Yes.
And I think that's just a major misstep. And even Luigi's Mansion, which does a lot to distance itself from that, still has Mario, still has the characters, still has the Boos. There's way more touchstones. Obviously, the mansion itself is...
EGAD is even relevant to Sunshine.
Yeah, it feels like Princess Peach was put off in her own little box.
Sure.
In what, to me, is... in some ways, a much lower stakes.
Yeah, well, that's actually very interesting because I can think of some pretty easy ways to make it not feel that way.
Yeah.
Of what if this was the Great Theater in like around her castle, like the Toad Town around her castle. You know, that's the thing that changes and evolves and is never the same between games. But I'm sure there's a theater. Conceptually, I'm sure there could be a theater.
There's no reason why there can't be.
Exactly in the city around around Peach's castle.
Yeah.
She has a connection to this place because it is near her home. It's in the Mushroom Kingdom, and even just that, and then like my idea of having a Mushroom Kingdom themed level, and maybe having some enemies that are dressed up in papercraft things that I don't think because I actually really agreed about not having Mario enemies in this game.
Yeah.
Because I think that would solve two issues. I think it would solve what we're talking about in terms of connecting this more back to the Mushroom Kingdom.
Yeah.
But I also think that it would add more enemy variety because enemy variety is really, really bad in this game. And if you could stomp on a Goomba, or you could have a Koopa shell, or whatever it is, or there was a Boo wearing a thing that only moved towards you when you were looking away from it.
Yeah.
That would solve enemy variety. It would make combat encounters more distinct. It would also it would tie it into the Mushroom Kingdom a little bit better. So I totally agree on that in that same conceptual area.
Yeah, I just think it's a bummer that Peach, I feel...
Oh, actually, one thing.
Yeah.
Sorry. I was realizing as you're talking about these other spin-off games, is that all these other Mario characters sub-series spin-offs have been started by core Nintendo teams. Yeah. Luigi's Mansion, Wario Land, Captain Toad, these were started by Nintendo in-house teams.
Yeah.
They were not necessarily continued forward in that way. Next Level Games took over Luigi's Mansion. Wario Land went to Goodfield, and Captain Toad hasn't had a chance to be invented like that. But I do think that there is that baseline of gameplay inventive quality that comes from an in-house Nintendo team, especially when they're trying something new. Because they usually hit a pretty good home run when they're trying something entirely new. That this game just doesn't have, because it's not coming from that team that cares as deeply as Nintendo does about creating a legacy for their characters.
Yeah, and I feel like sometimes I come off as a big Nintendo hater, and sometimes I come off as a massive fanboy. So I'm gonna just do both in this video.
Great
and
point.
See where it goes. I do just think that Nintendo's internal teams are better developers than most developers working.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Even the developers they trust quite closely. Look at ARMS and look at Splatoon versus Princess Peach Showtime and Sushi Striker, or a lot of these other things, right?
Sure.
That weren't first incubated within Nintendo.
Yeah.
They're able to make such visionary games that then people can come in and they can adopt that framework and do their own thing with it, but that core vision will always be there. And this game lacks that. Wario Land Shake It, I just want to hammer home this game because I feel like it's really just often not talked about as part of Goodfield's collection of Nintendo games.
It's the only one I haven't played.
Yeah, I think that this is a very, very, very good game. You know, it stood as a counterpoint to New Super Mario Brothers at the time. And it also was now a retrospective indication of the fact that good feel doesn't have to just be these games. These games are all in the same
Yes, absolutely.
tradition.
Yeah. And that's what people love them for.
Yeah, and
which is actually why one of the most surprising things about this game was learning that Good Feel made it. Because looking at the 3D animation and the lighting quality and the animation quality, I'm like, this looks a lot closer to Luigi's Mansion 3 than any of these games.
Yeah.
But I think that's a good thing. Because it does show that Good Feel has range, and they can make a game that has the same kind of like quote unquote realistic textures that something like Luigi's Mansion does, and the lighting and stuff, and not doing exactly just totally craft aesthetics. Though that's what made them more distinct as a developer.
Yeah, I just think it's weird because the reason I hammer on Wario Land is because it's a game that does often change its tempo. You're going through levels slower in one direction, then you're charging back through them in reverse. There's so much ingenuity there. Again, my Made in a Buckaroo is a game I would probably say is, it's in a 6-7 range for me probably. But again, it still shows that they can do something different that isn't these. It still has their uniting principles.
And Monkey Barrels?
Yeah, then you're getting to like Game Freak fucking Tembo tier stuff of like, well, does it even really? Yeah. It's just a totally different ball game. But I just think that this doesn't represent the team's ability. And that's part of my frustration. I think it doesn't represent the character that well beyond, again, animation and everything. And I don't think it represents the quality of the studio.
Sure. Yeah. What will be most exciting for me is if this is a, in our eyes, not very good game, but a solid framework to build upon, that then midway through next generation, Goodfield gets another chance to fully flesh out these ideas, give her own adventure, maybe tie it back a little bit, a new set of more diverse transformations, or even a totally different kind of game starring Peach. I think it is possible that this is a catalyst for good things, but a flawed good thing in and of itself.
Yeah, I just have a hard time looking at it that way just simply because this is the game we have.
Sure.
And I just feel like there's a very strong chance that it simply is not going to sell that well.
Yeah.
Bo, you were wrong. It's not selling 5 million units. And again, I don't want to be so negative about it. Yeah. I mean, it's a new Nintendo game. I want to be really excited about it. And I want Peach to finally have that big, cool game. But I just think that Peach has felt cooler in Odyssey. Yeah. And it was cool playing as her in Wonder. So the game's just a mess for me, I think. Just a mess.
Swing and miss? Oh, I missed. That's a little sketch for today, guys.